Ellie story, Chapter 9. Jacob was afraid. I could feel the fear rising off him into the air, and it made me nervous. Jacob had been worried. Sometimes when we were working, he'd been serious always, but he'd never been scared before, not like this. I galloped back to nudge his hand with my nose. I felt better if I could touch him. But I knew I couldn't stay right next to him. I needed to work. That would make Jacob's fear go away. The girl's scent, faint but clear, pulled me forward down the slope of the road. The path curved, and I lost sight of Jacob behind me. Ahead of me were a few buildings scattered across green grass. One of the buildings had steps leading up to a big porch. Up on the porch, a man had his back to me, working on the door with some kind of long metal tool. A little girl was sitting quietly on the steps, huddled back against the railings as if she were cold. But it wasn't a cold day. The sun was hot on my fur and I was panting. I slowed down a little, heading across the grass at a trot. The girl's sad face brightened a little as she saw me. She sat up and held out her tiny hand. The man whirled around, staring at me. My hackles rose when our eyes met, and I felt my lips pulling up to show my teeth. There was something dark inside him. Something vicious and wrong. I didn't like the smell of him at all, and I didn't like seeing him so near the little girl. The man jerked his head up, looking back along the road I'd come from. I turned and ran back. "Doggy!" the girl called after me. My claws digging into the dirt, I sprinted back to Jacob, who was jogging steadily down the road after me. "You got her," he said, after one look at my face. "Good girl, Ellie, show me." He could run nearly as fast as I could. We both tore down the road toward the building. The little girl was sitting there, looking confused, but the man was nowhere to be seen. 8 Kilo 6. Victim is secured and unharmed, Jacob handed into his walkie-talkie. Suspect fled on foot. Stick with the victim, 8 Kilo 6. Roger that. I could hear the distance of the whap, whap, whap of a helicopter blade beating in the air, and then the sound of footsteps running down the road behind us. 2 policemen came around the bend, sweating. "How are you, Emily?" one of them said, running up to the little girl. He was careful not to touch her, and he knelt down, bringing his face close to hers. "Are you hurt?" "No," said the little girl. She picked at a flower on her dress. "Is she all right? Are you okay, little girl?" A third police officer had come running, slower than the other two. He was panting for breath, and he put his hands on his knees. He was larger than the other two, both taller and heavier. I smelled ice cream on his breath. "Her name is Emily," the first policeman said. Jacob had been standing close to me, watching. The little girl looked at him. A shy smile touched her face. "Can I pet the doggy?" she asked. I felt Jacob's relief, the worst of the fear vanishing in the warm sun. That's how I knew I'd done the work right, even though it had been strange finding Ellie in the truck. I wagged my tail. "Sure," Jacob said kindly to Emily. "Then we've got to go back to work." My ears perked up at the word work. Emily stroked my head and smiled. She wasn't scared anymore either. I licked her fingers quickly. I could still feel a sternness in Jacob, even while he smiled down at Emily. We weren't done. Somehow I knew it. "Okay, I'll go with you," said the big policeman. He was still breathing hard. "John, you guys remain here with the girl. Watch Lady doesn't circle back around." "If he were close, Ellie would tell us," Jacob said. I looked up at him. Were we ready? I was ready. Was it time? "Find," Jacob said. I leapt ahead into the bushes. The brush was thick in spots, the soil underneath sandy and loose. I could track the man easily, though. The trail was fresh. He was headed steadily downhill. The smell was sharp and strong in a stand of tall grass. I ran back to Jacob. "Show me," he said, and followed. I took him to the grass, to the iron rod hidden there, coated with a man's unpleasant scent. Jacob and I had to wait more than a couple of minutes for the other policeman to catch up with us. "I fell a couple times," he gasped. I could smell his embarrassment and the thick sweat dripping off him. "Ellie says he's carrying this crowbar," Jacob reported tensely. "Looks like he dropped his weapon." "Okay, now what?" "Fine," Jacob commanded. I dashed ahead, leaving the 2 men to follow. The man's scent was painted on bushes and hanging in the air, and it wasn't long before I could hear him scuffling through the leaves and the rough grass. I ran more quickly. The breeze from ahead grew damp, bringing me his smell more strongly. I pushed through a thorny bush into the little clearing. The air was moist from the tiny stream, and the trees lifted their limbs high overhead, letting shade fall gently on the ground. He saw me and ducked behind one of those trees, just like Wally used to do. But Wally had never fooled me, and this man, with a dark, bitter smell, could not fool me either. I turned and ran back to Jacob. "Show me," he said. I stayed close to Jacob as he pushed his way through brush and saplings back to where I'd left the man. Jacob and I stepped out into the little clearing. I could hear the stream trickling over the stones. I knew where the man was hiding. I could smell his fear and his hate and his angry scent. I led Jacob toward the tree. The man stepped out into the sunlight. I heard Jacob shout, "Police! Freeze!" The man raised his hand, and there was a noise as sharp as a thunderclap. Just a gun. I knew about guns. Jacob had shown me. Guns were okay. Noise couldn't hurt me. Noise could not hurt anybody. But I sensed a flash of pain from Jacob, and he fell to the ground. I smelled blood, warm and salty, and I heard his gun clatter away over roots and rocks. The man took another step forward, his arm still out, the gun still pointed at Jacob and at me. I sensed the man's pleasure, saw his gloating smile. I didn't know how, but somehow this man had hurt Jacob. He'd used the gun to make that noise, and now Jacob was on the ground. Behind me, Jacob gasped for breath. I didn't growl. I just lowered my head and charged. The gun made its terrible noise 2 more times, and then I had the man's wrist in my mouth. His weapon fell with a soft thump into the dust. I couldn't make that loud sound. It couldn't make that loud sound now. The sound that could hurt people, that had hurt Jacob so badly. The man screamed at me, and I held on, shaking my head violently, as if he were my prey. My teeth broke his skin and tore into the muscles of his arm. His foot smacked into my ribs, but I did not let my jaw loosen. "Let go," he yelled. "Police! Freeze!" shouted another voice. It was the big policeman shoving his way out from behind a bush. "Get the dog off me! Ellie, it's okay. Down, Ellie, down!" the other policeman commanded. I let go of the man's arm and he fell to his knees. His eyes met mine. I could feel his pain, but also his cunning. He was happy in some odd, twisted way, even though he was on the ground with his arm bleeding. I didn't trust him, and I growled, warning him. He thought he was going to get away with something. "Ellie, come," the policeman ordered. I had always obeyed "come" ever since Jacob had taught me the words, with treats in his pockets. I backed up, my eyes never leaving the bleeding man. "Dog ripped my arm off my arm," the man shouted. He waved at something behind and to the left of the policeman. "I'm over here," he called. When the policeman turned quickly to see what was behind him, the man lunged, scooping up his gun and leaping to his feet. I barked, quickly, loudly, and my body tensed to spring. The man I'd found fired his gun, and the noise made my ears hurt. But the big policeman was already turning. His gun made its own noise twice, and the other man fell to the ground, just as Jacob had done. "Cannot believe I fell for that one," the big policeman muttered, pointing his gun at the man while he lay on the ground. The policeman took a few cautious steps forward and kicked the other gun away into a patch of grass. "Ellie, you okay?" Jacob asked faintly. "She's okay, Jacob. Where you hit?" "Gut." I'd already left the man I'd found. He wasn't a threat anymore, I could tell, and Jacob needed me. I ran to his side, but lay down a foot or so away, and then crawled forward carefully so I could nudge at his hand with my nose. I sensed I had to be very careful not to touch him too much. Jacob's hand did not lift to scratch my ears the way it always had. I licked it and whined. I could feel the pain deep inside him, feel it was working its way through his body. The smell of the blood was powerful. I could hardly smell anything else. "Officer down, suspect down, where?" The policeman looked up at the sky. "We're under some trees down the canyon. Need medevac for the officer." "Who is the officer?" came the voice from the walkie-talkie. 8 Kilo 6, we need some help down here now." I didn't know what to do. Jacob had been afraid before, but now he seemed calm. I wasn't, though. I was panting and trembling with fear. I'd done my job. I'd found the girl and she was safe. I'd found the man. That was right, wasn't it? That was what I was supposed to do. But the man had hurt Jacob. That wasn't what should happen. Finding people was supposed to mean saving them. Now Jacob was the one who needed saving. I didn't know how, though. I was here, right beside him. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't what he needed. The big policeman knelt down next to Jacob. They're on their way, bro. You just got to hang on now. I felt the worry in his voice. Gingerly, he opened up Jacob's shirt to get a look inside. The shock of fear that went through him made me whimper. Soon, I could hear crashing and stumbling, and several people run toward us. They knelt by Jacob, pushing me aside, and began working on him. I smelled sharp chemicals, and I saw them pressing Klaus to where there was the most blood. How's Emily? Jacob asked them faintly. Who? The little girl, the policeman explained. She's fine, Jacob. You found her. You saved her. Everything's okay. More people arrived, and they lifted Jacob onto a strange, flat bed and started to carry him up the canyon. I ran right past him. Ahead of us, I heard the familiar sound of a helicopter motor stirring to life. The policeman who had been with us held on to my collar as the people put Jacob on the helicopter. The blade started spinning faster and faster, whipping dust and leaves through the air, and the helicopter rose slowly into the sky. I wrenched myself free from the policeman's hand and ran after the helicopter, barking. It rose up, and I circled beneath it, dancing on my hind legs, barking in frustration. I was a chopper dog. Why hadn't they let me go on? I needed to go with Jacob. But the helicopter didn't come back. After a while, Amy came to get me. She talked to the big policeman for a while and then clipped on a leash on my collar and took me for a truck ride. The cage I was riding in was filled with cami scent. Amy took me back to the kennel at the police station, calling Cammy to her as I went in. Gypsy was nowhere to be seen. Amy put the leash on Cammy and scratched behind my ears before she shut the door, leaving me in the kennel alone. Someone will check on you. We'll figure out where you're going to live, Ellie. You're a good dog. You are a good dog, Amy said.